Let me ask you a question. Just think this to yourself. Fill in the blank. The topic of money and stuff makes me feel blank. The topic of money and stuff, perhaps especially money, makes me feel how? What emotions surface there? Stress, maybe? Guilt? Jealousy? Worry? Annoyance at me for bringing up the topic in church? Oh no, here goes Father. Notice that most of us probably don't associate positive feelings with regard to the topic of our money and our possessions. Of course, we know we need stuff. We often want more stuff and more money. At least I do. We all do. We work hard to earn. We work hard to afford to buy things. And then we want to enjoy everything we have, right? In addition, we want our families to be secure. We want our homes to be comfortable. We want our kids to be provided for. And yet, we look at all the poverty in the world, or maybe as well, all the excess stuff in our lives. Just open up your closet, my closet, or look at your garage. We can feel conflicted. We can feel conflicted. We want to live well, but we also want to be generous. We want to have things, but not let things have us. And then, when in church, we hear this talk about money and possessions, it can stir up strong emotions too. Or maybe you're from a culture where the Catholic Church seemed to be rich. At least that's the impression. Believe me, we're not rich here. Maybe you've heard a fundraising appeal. It sounded like a guilt trip at some point. Some people have even walked away from church at one point because all you heard maybe from the pulpit here is, we need more. Talking about money and stuff for me or any preacher, for that reason, is a little dangerous. Any teacher of the gospel. And I'd say that's exactly why Jesus actually talked more about this subject than anything else. Do you know that? In fact, he spoke more about money and possession than he did about heaven, hell, sex, family life, and most other topics. Why is that? Because Jesus knows how quickly, quote unquote, stuff can steal our peace, how money can dominate our thoughts, how mammon can even capture our hearts. And yet everything that Jesus teaches in the Gospels about money and possessions is for our benefit. He never asked anybody for money. Never. He didn't want something from us. He wanted something for us. And that's why this series, calling Everything Must Go, isn't about any fundraising here, St. John's. Let me be clear, there's no ask at the end of this message series. We do have the Diocesan Annual Appeal coming up. That's in the fall. You know, that's from the bishop and everything. With that, people support that. That always happens this time of year. But this message series here, my preaching, is not about asking for money. It's fundamentally about, for all of us together, to learn to handle money and possessions in a way that frees us instead of enslaving us. Because how we handle our stuff and how we follow Jesus always go hand in hand. Well, let me just tell a little from my personal life. In my life, I've been taking care of my dad, as some of you know, helping him out with many things, including all his stuff. A few weeks ago, I was with him for a whole week. I was doing a lot of errands and cleaning up, and I was going around the house, my dad's house, with a big garbage bag. Well, he started following me around, checking out anything I was trying to throw away, and then yelling at me. And I was getting a little sneaky, trying to throw away a bunch of things, and my dad just kind of correctly noticed at one point that I was getting obsessive and compulsive about this, trying to throw out stuff in the house. The problem is that it's his stuff, not mine. So I had to kind of re-examine myself, and I had to first realize it's not my stuff, and second, I had to examine, I'm not really worried and anxious about his material stuff. I'm worried and anxious about him and his well-being. And so God was kind of pretty direct with me, convicting me on that point. And so today, in the gospel, Jesus is also quite direct. So it's important as we look at this passage, very briefly, a couple verses from St. Luke's gospel, to know that Jesus often uses in his teaching what I call rabbinical rhetoric to get his point across. He's this great master teacher or rabbi. So, for example, he says in one place, if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. He doesn't mean literally that we pluck out our eyes, but that we guard our eyes against lust. And in a similar way, last week he said in the gospel that we heard, in serving a meal to the poor, we're blessed because of that poor person's inability to repay us. We're blessed not because we're just giving our money away to the poor and then getting worried that we're going to be scammed by somebody. No, we're blessed because every time we give in a sacrificial way, our hearts are being formed to charity. So just keep in mind Jesus, what I call rabbinical rhetoric, as we look at the passage today from Luke's gospel, which begins like this. If anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Pretty strong language, right? Hate in this passage doesn't mean malice. It doesn't mean we have permission to go and hurt or harm our family members. It doesn't mean that we're allowed to do that sin of detraction, to try to bring malice to another person. The word hate here can be translated or interpreted as to put second or to love less. So Jesus is saying, if you want to follow me, your relationship with me must come first, even above family. And then he adds this, whoever does not carry his own cross cannot be my disciple. Of course, this is probably more familiar. Discipleship, that is being a lifelong apprentice, a student, a follower of Christ, it always involves sacrifice. Not centering life on us, but on Christ. Just remembering his mercy, that he has paid the ultimate price first for us. So there's a cost to be a disciple of Jesus. He makes it clear there's a cost to be a disciple. Because there is a cost, Jesus then tells these two mini parables, the two little parables about counting the cost. And I'm not going to go through them. He talks about a person building a tower, and he talks about a general fighting a battle. Think about this as a similar analogy. If you're going to build a house or buy a house here in the Poconos, you have to count the cost. You have to count the material cost. You have to count the cost of travel to work or to the supermarket. We all know the cost of travel around here, especially for commuters, can be a lot. And when you move here, you also count the cost of your quality of life, coming out to the beautiful nature in the woods here. And also, as a parent, you count the cost, or at least the quality of the schools. You also count the cost of how far you are or close you are to your family and your friends, all that stuff, and much, much more. The point is this: the cost of being a disciple is always involving sacrifice. At the end of this passage, Jesus drives this point home then with regard to our possessions. He says this: in the same way, any one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. Again, this is rabbinical rhetoric. Renounce here doesn't mean literally giving it all away. It doesn't literally mean for every single one of us that. There is a special call. Say if you're called to be a Franciscan, you're called to be a religious monk or nun, to take a special vow of poverty. That's a special calling for the few, to literally renounce all their possessions. For most of us, when Jesus says this, renounce your possessions, he means holding on to our possessions lightly. It means refusing to let them dominate us or take first place in our hearts. And so, my friends, let me be clear, Jesus is not against money or stuff. He's against idolatry. He's against letting things crowd him out of first place. He invites us to live in this great tension because it is a tension. We need possessions, but we're also called to use them as tools to love God, to love others, and not let them be masters that control us. So, as we introduce this message, here's the homework for you this week. First, go ahead, name that number one emotion, especially a negative emotion when it comes to our money and possession. Just name that in your prayer. It could be stress, envy, guilt, worry, or something else. Name that, and then bring it to your daily prayer every day this week. Offer that to God. And second, I invite you to stay with us through the next 5 weeks. We're going to keep exploring how Jesus teaches us to handle possessions in freedom and not in fear. And here's the promise. When you're focused on Jesus instead of your possessions, you don't fall into the comparison trap. When you're focused on Jesus instead of your money, you don't live in guilt or shame. When you're focused on Jesus instead of your stuff, you don't waste your time, like I might tend to do, on worry and anxiety, because Jesus reminds us worry is useless, but prayer is powerful. You know, you are not rich or poor. You are not a spender or a saver. You are not a minimalist or a collector, or whatever name we might give ourselves. You're not defined by your money and your stuff. You're defined by your relationship with Jesus Christ. And that truth sets us free to live simply, to love generously, and to hold everything we have with open hands. Because you know what? In the end, you can't take it with you. Everything must go. Amen.